If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be lost in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you that if 2 or 3 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done to them and for them by my Father in heaven. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there too I am. I want to begin my message with you today by telling you about a specific day in my life. August 31st, 2011. Now, I'm sure you don't remember that was a Wednesday. And for most people, it was just an average hump day. But for me, it was anything but that. Because this indeed was like no day I had ever experienced before in my life. Up to that point, 48 years, this was no day I had ever experienced, because August 31st, 2011 was the day that I was going to kill myself. This is the day that the monster known as clinical depression, after trying passionately for close to 40 years, had finally convinced me of the great lie on that specific day, that I was no longer worthy to live. I took that as a truth. Even though it was a horrific falsehood, I took that as a truth. And I remember that day very clearly. I was living just not about 20 minutes from here in the little town of Parkview, not far from Loomis. And it was the end of August, and that morning was just like today. The sky was this Michelangelo-like rendition of a painting, almost Sistine Chapel-like. And of course, end of August, there was no chance of rain. And I remember walking around the 2.5-acre parcel I shared at the time with my then bride, Deanna. And I think about it now, and it's like my mind was going around taking snapshots. And after a short while, I went back into our home, I sat down at the computer, and I typed out my suicide note. And then, without telling anybody where I was headed, I made the short drive from our home in Penryn to the Forest Hill Bridge. Now, most people have heard about the Forest Hill Bridge. Most people may not realize, though, that the Forest Hill Bridge at 730 feet is 500 feet further off the ground than its more famous cousin in San Francisco. And I brought my vehicle to a rest in a spot that I thought would be ideal, far enough to not cause any distraction, but close enough where in time it would be discovered. I turned off the ignition, put my hands reflexively on the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, then opened my eyes, reached over, grabbed the suicide note that I had typed out, placed that right in the center of the dash, took the keys out of the ignition, placed those in the center of the note, exited the vehicle, then turned back around just to make sure I left the door unlocked. Reversed course, crossed over the road, and then came to the closest part of the bridge. Now, the bridge is a half a mile long, and the view from either side is spectacular. It is awe-inspiring. But I didn't want to look at the view lest I be distracted. I didn't want to make eye contact with the drivers passing by lest I'd be distracted. Instead, I stared at a light post that stood exactly 1,000 feet away from me and made my way step by step to that center point. I then turned to my left. The suicide barrier hit me right about the chest, and again, resisting temptation to look up, I looked down. I looked down at this spot of water in the North Fork of the American River and became so fixated that I lost track of time and space. And I say that because I can't tell you how long I stood there in that spot, contemplating, imagining, even rehearsing the end of my life. But thankfully, it was long enough for a passing driver looking upon the scene to realize something's not right with this picture. That soul, God with skin on, picked up the phone, called 911, and then a Placer County Deputy Sheriff approached me from the left-hand side and initially established contact, which is logistical, and then created connection, which is life-saving, because connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. I was taken off the bridge to the emergency room down at Sutter and Roseville, and ultimately to a place they call the Puff. The Puff is the psychiatric health facility. It's a psych hospital, and I would be a guest at this extraordinary, life-changing place for the next 15 days. And when people found out I was there and why, they were shocked. They couldn't get their head around it. I looked very much then at 48 like I do now at 57, and instead of seeing me as clinically depressed or suicidal, people saw me as the happy and contented co-director of a large, nationally recognized animal sanctuary called A Chance for Bliss. If you like animals, you would have loved this place. This was an amazing assortment of close to 100 animals at any one time. 25 horses, 23 dogs, 9 pot-bellied pigs, goats and sheep and ducks and geese and bunnies and birds, this whole plethora. If Noah were alive today, he would have been jealous of this place. And animals had to be very sick, very old, enduring some sort of special need, or the vast majority were at the end of life, and so we did no adoptions. Animals came to live out the end of their life until they made their transition from this experience to the next. And we became known throughout the country, so much so that on June 2nd, 2010, we were the cover story in the life section of USA Today. I didn't fit the image when you think of somebody who suffers from mental illness. I didn't fit the image of somebody who might be at the highest risk for suicide, but the most important thing that I will tell you today is sometimes what hurts the most can't be seen. Sometimes great despair and soul-crushing agony lies just behind a forced smile, a distracting joke, or in this case, a seemingly perfect and ideal life. And because of that, people had no idea, not even my former beloved, the state of despair and agony and suffering that I was in. And just 14 short months after the mountaintop experience of being USA Today, there I was on a dark spot on a tall, tall bridge, so close to killing myself. But my life was changed, my life was saved, and on a day I thought would be my very last day alive, it was instead the first day of a brand new life and the first steps in what has now been a 9-year ongoing journey away from mental illness and into the experience of God's will for us, mental health. And this morning, in the presence of 3 extraordinary pastoral souls and all of you, I want to share with you 3 different things. I want to share with you what it feels like because it's important that you know. I want to share with you what I've learned, and in doing so help you separate myth from fact, and I want to share with you what I believe we can do to support not only ourselves but our brothers and sisters who are out there in the millions suffering. So first thing, what does it feel like? And I've shared this with you because I believe that the most direct path we have to overcoming our fears about mental illness is to leverage the power of curiosity to create understanding. Because the truth is, the opposite of fear is not calm. The opposite of fear is understanding. The more I understand, the less I fear. So I'd like you to imagine a time that you were sad, a time that you were disappointed in yourself, a time that you felt inadequate, a time maybe where you felt invisible, a time that you were embarrassed, a time that you felt like you were a burden to somebody else, a time that your body was ill, that your mind was tired, that your soul felt depleted. Now add all those things together, take them to an exponent of 10, and that gives you just a little hint of what it's like to live with depression. In the words of a great psychologist, Dr. Beverly Shanks, she says that depression must surely be the first cousin to hell on earth. For in the midst of suffering, a soul feels hopeless and separate from God. And in fact, that's what happens is depression can usher us into the horrific place of hopelessness, which is the true killer of people like myself who suffer. And in the place of hopelessness, in the words of St. Paul, when there is no vision, when there is no hope, people will perish. And it was in that space that I stood on the bridge, and in that space that I went into the psychiatric hospital, but in a place that really was almost like a university. My life changed because first I learned the cause. And for me, it was this horrific confluence of the inherited genetics of my grandfather who ended his life by suicide, my horrifically clinically depressed father, along with the horror of at age 11 of being raped by a Boy Scout leader. And understanding that that planted the seeds of my suffering. And then in meeting with this extraordinary holy man, a psychiatrist, on the second day there, he told me 2 things that were life-changing. The first was, after telling me what the cause, the realization that, David, you did not choose this. You didn't choose your genetics and you didn't choose your trauma. You did not choose your malady. But even more transformative, even more holy and sacred was that he reached forward, he held my hands in this beautifully compassionate, loving way, and looked at me and said 4 words. It's not your fault. Now, I couldn't hear him the first time he said that because it was so opposite what I believed about myself. And so this extraordinary soul just picked up on these nonverbal clues, held my hand with an even greater sense of love and said, please hear me, my brother. It's not your fault. And then these next 15 days began. I really understood what I was dealing with and how do I become well. And he said the malady impacts the trinity of who you are, your body, your mind, and your spirit. And the only way to be well is to attend to the same. Diet, sleep, exercise, peer support, psychology, psychiatry, medication. The foundation, of course, of our relationship with the God of our understanding and a sense of purpose and work. But then he says, David, you must put your self-care on a pedestal. It must be the number one priority in your life. And as a Christian, I struggled with that. Because I thought, well, the great commandment is to love thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul. But then a friend of mine once said to me, David, what's the second that is like the first? And I thought for a moment, I'm like, yeah, it's to love thy neighbor as thyself. Like Jesus actually was the greatest advocate of self-care. And I realized that put it into great context. But of everything that I do, it is indeed this thing called connection that is most important. The 3 most essential words in mental health are connection, connection, connection. Connection is the currency of wellness. And again, you realize what was Jesus' message in the scripture that we just read. Jesus was the master connector. Jesus said, when 2 or more are gathered in my name. Jesus didn't say that when 2 or more are gathered in my name in church or in synagogue or in a mosque. Jesus was about spreading Christianity in every part of every world and every day and every moment. So Jesus was advocating the reality that we can presence God when we are connected.
Amen.
And how do we connect? And I think there's lots of different ways, and I want to speak briefly about 3. I want to talk about recognition, understanding, and expression. And I'm kind of a freak about names. I love names. I love to know the story behind people's names. It's a great way for me to learn how to remember names. But realize Dale Carnegie said that to a person, the sound of that person's name is the sweetest sound in any language. Imagine a time, and we've all had it, when somebody has remembered our name and we had no expectation.
Right.
That simple act can bring us from the cold place of banishment to the warm space of belonging. Now, we've all, myself included, probably at the head of the line, we've acted in ways that make no sense. I am certain that courageous first responder looked at me and said, what's a nice guy like this doing on a bridge right here? Our behavior makes no sense. As it was to understand what it feels like, we need to leverage curiosity to create understanding. And speaking with what Veronica just said, that you love questions, inquiries, that we need to ask. The first question out of the first responder's mouth after the establishment of contact was, David, what does it feel like to be depressed? A counterintuitive question that we may think may push somebody over the edge, but actually it's what pulls you back. And then he listened. And in the words of the great Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, she says, our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts and other people. Recognition, understanding, and then expression. We need to let people, especially now, brothers and sisters, we need to let them know how we feel. Well, gosh, I told them I loved them in the morning. Well, tell them at lunchtime and at night and while they're sleeping. Tell them that I'm there for you. Tell them that we think that you are great. You got this, and we can do this together. You survived 100% of your worst days, and we will get through this together. We will journey with us side by side, hand in hand. And we can send a text. We can make a phone call. We can send a letter, but we all know that the most sacred way is by the good old-fashioned handwritten note.
Nice.
We've all had the experience. We go to the mailbox, and there is the unsolicited mail.
Right.
There are bills, there are notices, and then there's that uniquely sized envelope.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And we know, okay, it's going to be one of 3 things. It's going to be an invitation, might be cash, or it's going to be somebody taking the time to let us know they love us.
Oh, yes.
Not long ago, a dear soul who's like a daughter to me knew sometimes what hurts David the most can't be seen, and sometimes what helps David the most is easy to do. She followed her intuition and put pen to paper to tell me that she loved me, to tell me that she and I are making this journey together, that we are a team. And at the end of this note, which you could offer me $1 million, I would not yield this. At the end of the note, with just 7 simple words, she pulled me from the cold space of isolation to the warm place of inclusion by telling me in no uncertain words, depression can't have you because you're ours. Connection is extraordinary. And like the scripture that my beloved Rolla read, connection is childlike. We know to enter into the kingdom of heaven, not just a destination that we all yearn for, but an experience now on earth as it is in heaven. Connection is not only a practice of Christianity, it's a practice of community. It's a practice of inclusion. Now, COVID-19 and racial division and the stress that we are experiencing now is isolating us. We need brothers and sisters to come together right now. Simple things, remembering a name, asking a question, writing a note, can help us overcome. And we are fighting a very formidable foe, one that has become very cocky. There's an extraordinary psychiatrist in New York, Dr. Drew Ramsey, and in one short paragraph, he presents the problem and the solution. He is far more brief than I. These are the doctor's words, not mine, in which he says, somebody you see today is thinking about killing themselves.
Wow.
Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did. We will win this fight. With God, all things are possible.
Amen.
And I believe when we do, it'll look something like this. Now, one day, Deanna and I got a call at the sanctuary from a dear friend, Dr. Margaret Hunt at the Sacramento Animal Shelter. And Dr. Hunt is one of those courageous souls who has to make the incredibly difficult decision of which animal has a chance to be adopted and which can't. So she called us, and by that time, we were known as lovers of all things old and all things Boston Terrier. The American gentleman, the smaller version of a bulldog dressed in a tuxedo. And so Dr. Hunt called and says, I have this Boston. She has no chance of being adopted. She can't stand. She is medically incapacitated, but there's something about her that is pulling my heartstrings. Would you please take her? Is there room at the inn? And we said, absolutely. And Dee and I go down there, and before we could ask, Dr. Hunt says, well, I've named her Ruth. And before we could ask why, she says, because I want her to have respect, understanding, truth, and honor. And I thought, what a great name, the story behind her name. And we took Ruthie home. Now, I need to tell you, stay with me on this. All of the dogs, 23, lived in the house. Very clean. I'm a neatnik. I love the vacuum. So we brought Ruthie home, and we put her amongst her new 22 brothers and sisters. And it's fascinating to me about dogs. Not a surprise that it's G-O-D-D-O-G.
Right.
Just saying. Put Ruthie down, and her brothers and sisters then asked questions by way of their nose. Welcomed her to that space, created connection. And then one by one, I watched as one of the dogs would just come and be with her. Just lay with her. Just be by the side, knowing there's nothing to fix, there's nothing broken. She's not anything but just in a space that she is. And when we bring our food over to Ruthie, one of the dogs would come over and eat with her. And this is the way that it went. And then one day I'm doing my chores, and out of the periphery of my mind, or my eyes, I catch a glimpse, and Ruth is walking. We had no expectation that Ruth would be able to walk. And then Ruthie just got better and better and better. And now when one of the dogs came over to eat with her, she kind of went, started to get, as Dee used to like to say, with a little pep in her, hey. So there she was. Now, we had these dog doors that the dogs would go in and out of the house into the backyard, and they just went freely. It was extraordinary. So one day I'm in the backyard, and I'm attending to this grassy knoll area that the dogs got to luxuriate in, and I look at Ruth, and I'm like, what is she doing? And then I realize she's digging. She's remembering what it's like to be a dog, and then all of a sudden her head pops up, and she has something in her mouth, and I can't quite decide what it is. And by then she has turned around. Her head is up in this place of confidence that I'd not yet experienced. I'd not yet seen her. And she has this gross, smelly, yucky, wonderful, amazing bone that one of the other dogs has buried. And she has taken it And she is holding that bone head high, ears up, full of confidence, a renewal and a transformation back into her house. Her self-respect had been restored. She felt like she was understood. She remembered the truth of who she was, and she was going to take her rightful place of honor amongst her family. We have all been given a name. We're named at birth, and yet I think at the core of who we are, we're all Ruth. That's really what our name is. And so as we go forth to be about our Father's works, brothers and sisters, if we forget what to do to help another, maybe all we need to do is to help people remember their name.
Yes.
God bless you.